So the last presentation that I want to cover in what hopefully finishes the OKR training for this OKR planning session, preemptively for this OKR planning session for all of us, is the how and why of OKR retrospectives. One of the things I've sent out this time around to everybody is before we directly jump into our next quarter, which is July, August, September quarters OKR planning. So before all of us as teams start deciding our team quarterly objectives for July, August, September, it's important for all of us to do a quick retrospective of April, May, June, and learn whatever lessons we have to learn with regards to the objectives and key results and initiatives that we set for ourselves in the last quarter, and what can we learn from them. So this presentation just covers a recommended process and reasons why we should do these retrospectives. I'm going to skip the terminology refresher again out here. So let's first start with always the why, which is, what is the reason why we should do OKR retrospectives and why is it important? I don't know how many people have known this sort of age-old adage on advertising, and this is like a common, it's not even a joke, it's actually a fact in advertising. We say half the money that anybody spends on advertising is wasted. The trouble is you never know which half it is, right? Otherwise you wouldn't waste that money. But the thing is that happens a lot about not just capital on advertising, that happens a lot about time and resources that we spend in the organization, right? Half the work that sometimes we do is wasted, but the trouble is that we never stop to think which half that was. And so we'll keep repeating the same mistakes. And so the retrospective is essentially meant to prevent this. If we don't stop to reflect on what we did or what we at least set out to achieve and what we did achieve from that, what we didn't achieve, what impact we made, then we'll never learn the mistakes that we made in each of these sort of cycles. In fact, check-ins are like mini retrospectives. So think about the quarterly retrospective as kind of a bigger cross-team organizational one. But if you don't stop to reflect, we'll never learn. And it's important to understand two more things out here, right? Which is that poor team quarterly objectives can waste an entire quarter. So if we didn't learn from the previous quarter and we just went ahead with the next quarter's planning session and again ended up with poor objectives for the next quarter, we could actually end up wasting an entire quarter, and poor initiatives could waste fortnights or months. And so to the extent that we can even pause for a couple of hours and learn some lessons from our past objectives and past initiatives, we could actually save a substantial amount of time, not just for an individual, not just for the leaders, not just for you, but for your entire team. Because as an entire team, if we end up focusing on poor initiatives or poor objectives, we actually will end up wasting time and resources that we could have spent towards actually moving the needle for our organization. And so, in effect, the biggest reason why we should do these retrospectives is that they reduce wastage of our time, capital, resources. Also, it's not as much fun, spending a quarter working on a bunch of tasks and at the end of the quarter figuring out that, hey, actually we didn't make as much of progress that we hope to make on the company's annual objectives. Okay, now let's start planning the next quarter's objectives, right? If we knew where we were wasting our time and how we could improve on those processes, and it's important to be brutal about this, by the way, amongst all of us, then we will actually become better and better and get to a point where we feel like every single quarter we're actually delivering the absolute highest impact that we can possibly deliver. So that was the entire, why retrospectives. And before I get to how to conduct a retrospective, or at least my recommendations for a process on how, and this process will also evolve over time, but how should we conduct retrospectives amongst ourselves on a quarterly basis? Well, I guess it's easy to come up with that process if we take a step back and realize what do we need to learn. And, having sat and sort of thought about this for some time and looked at sort of our last quarterly objectives, etc., I've seen at least 6 lessons that I could gauge or learn from some of the objectives that we've set across Floxita, various business units, etc., right? Which is some of the mistakes that we made or lessons or areas we could learn lessons is misaligned TQOs. So there are quarterly objectives that we've set in the last quarter that we felt were really good, or previous quarters or whatever, that we may end up feeling are good, but actually don't align with our company annual objectives. And therefore, we may achieve the team quarterly objective, but realize that it didn't actually help the organization as much. Similarly, there's misaligned initiatives, low impact objectives, low impact initiatives, non-achievements and non-ambitious objectives and KRs basically. So those are kind of 6 lessons that we need to learn. And I'll explain some of these more that I want to some of these in a bit more detail. So if I look at the first four, I just sort of drew out this table of alignment and impact, right? Which is basically misalignment for TQOs and initiatives means either an objective that cannot impact a key result, a company's key result. So if the entire engineering team or the product team or the marketing team or the support team picks up an amazing quarterly objective that sounds great, but if it's actually not going to make any difference to any of the company's annual KRs, then it's a misaligned objective, and you'll work on it, you'll spend a quarter on it, but we may not see any progress at the company level. Or going down one level in your cadence, if on a monthly basis or a fortnightly basis, if you pick an initiative that possibly cannot impact your team's quarterly key result, then it might be a great initiative, might be an awesome feature that you built, or an amazing discovery that you made from a product spec doc standpoint, or an interesting campaign that you decided to run. But if before running it you didn't actually take time to think about whether it will have an impact on any of your TQKRs, and if you really had spent time thinking about it and you realized that it would not actually have any impact on them, then that's a misaligned initiative. So misalignment is actually really bad, because the moment you have a misalignment, you've worked on something for either an entire quarter or a week, fortnight, or month that actually didn't that we should not have prioritized at this time. It doesn't mean that it was never priority. Maybe some of these things were things that we should fix at a later stage in the company, or 6 months from now or the next quarter, but it wasn't important for this quarter or this year. And so that's a big problem when we have misalignment. The second level problem is low impact. So something that is aligned, and we pick up an objective that actually does have an alignment, but it's not the highest impact objective, or it's not the highest impact initiative. And that's what the low impact sort of bucket talks about. And let me actually give you poor examples. Please don't make any judgments from this. I'm picking up examples, some that are live, some that are not necessarily. These examples don't also necessarily mean that these are poor examples. They're meant to exemplify. So again, preemptive disclaimer, but just again to give you sort of much more of an insight in terms of what could possibly be. May not necessarily be, but could possibly be some level of misalignment or low impact. So for instance, as an example, let's say we have a company annual objective, a company CO KR, so company KR rather, company annual KR, which says that we want to get to 4 million active business mail accounts and $500,000 in MRR. Now, this is something that we've all agreed on as a company is really important to us. That's why we made it our most important out of the 4 objectives that we have. This is one of the objectives, or rather, these are 2 KRs against one of those objectives, right? And if, let's say, as an example, an engineering team picks up an objective that says create a 99% crash-free mobile client experience. Now, this is a good objective to have. Certainly it gives a great experience to our customers. Is this the most important objective, or at all an objective that will move the needle on any of these? If it's not, it's a misaligned objective. And if we spend an entire quarter working on a misaligned objective, then those resources, whether it's 1 week of work or 4 weeks of work, probably could have been spent on objectives that actually move the needle specifically on the company annual objectives that we've picked up. So misalignment can be quite detrimental to progress, because it will take an entire quarter of time in terms of context, in terms of discussions, in terms of work, effort, ideation, initiatives, etc., but not move the needle for the company, because the company actually cares about these things. And unless there is a clear linkage, there might be. I mean, if, for instance, we have a mobile client that crashes half the time, resulting in extremely poor retention, yes, then the objective will have a justifiability, because we would never be able to get to 4 million active users with a extremely lousy experience. But the threshold may not be 99%, or we may not even need to do this because we're already there, or some such thing. Just giving an example again, as I said, in terms of alignment, right? Low impact TQOs, again, I've picked this from BD, something that I was working on, and fortunately, sort of, as I said, in the process, etc. I did some thinking, I spent some time on this stuff, and then eventually at some point in time we had to discard it. So in the planning stage itself, I should have potentially discarded it. But as an example again, as a company for Flock Mail, we have decided, again, same 2 KRs. We want to get to 4 million active business email accounts and 500K MRR. And when I started thinking about these, this is another, by the way, I'll give you a tip on this sort of, how this gets originated also, right? This is another let me actually go back to both of these in terms of origination of both of these. And the temptations that end up resulting in either misalignment, at least one of the temptations that ends up resulting in either misalignment or low impact. In this case, this misalignment, if assuming we agree, let's say this is a misalignment, again, as I said, these are all examples, so we can always agree to disagree. But sometimes this could come from the notion of, hey, if I have spare time, can I pick up an objective outside of, you know, the ones that we've listed out? That could be one such temptation, right? Or this TQO, I'll give an example. So let me first explain this TQO. So what this TQO says is, our BD team wanted to create, or in this case, the BD team was me along with a bunch of product people in terms of discussions. So we want to create a self-serve model for long-tail web hosts. And what this means is, if we want to get to 4 million active business email accounts, and one of the approaches that we chose is that we want to do it through, you know, let's say partners, and we have, you know, different types of partners, right? We have really large companies, large domain registrars and web hosts. Then we have the mid-sized ones, and then we have long-tail ones. There are 30,000 such companies, each of whom have like 100, 200, 300 clients, right? And so the temptation was that once we classified these buckets, we were like, okay, let's parallelly handle all 3 buckets. So we'll start pitching to the large guys, we'll start pitching to the mid-sized guys, and we'll come up with some sort of a model for the long-tail guys. You know, as product keeps talking about the fact that, you know, make a pitch document, right? If you really thought about validating this, you'd realize that more than 80% of the market share of the world is concentrated amongst the top set. So if any time spent on this will actually require lots and lots of support people, onboarding people, process automation, but will not get us close to achieving our, you know, 4 million business mail accounts. Because to achieve 4 million business mail accounts through long-tail web hosts, we would have to sign up tens of thousands of them and get them activated before we even get to, you know, 1 million maybe. I don't know. Again, just doing an approximate calculation, right? So this TQO is aligned to my company annual objective, which means that if I go to long-tail web hosting companies and partner with them, I will get business mail customers, but it's a very low impact one. Can I, instead of this, skip this and instead focus only on the highest impact 1 or 2 or 3 that are actually going to move the needle here? So we have to try and avoid low impact TQOs, because again, if we pick up a low impact TQO, we'll end up working on it for the entire quarter, and we'll end up taking time away from the higher impact ones that that make a difference, right? So what we spoke about at the TQO level is also a mistake that we can make at the initiative level. So we can have a misaligned initiative. And so this is one level below. Let's take an example that that one of the KRs, and here, by the way, I've taken a fictional one because this wasn't what, you know, something that we've done per se, but let's say I have a KR that says, and this is the only KR for the entire product and engineering team, that I want to improve the 16th week retention of flock mail from 5% to 15%, just to simplify stuff. Many times we end up picking up initiatives without actually seeing if they're going to move something on the KRs. This is, again, as I said, where the check-in process helps. So, you know, somebody might put up a feature request in a channel, or somebody might say our mobile client is not performing well. And so somebody in the team might say, okay, let me pick it up because it's a report in our bug system, or it's the next thing that I can see in my to-do list, or somebody just sent it right now, you know, the person who shouts the most ends up getting, you know, attention, or Bhavin sent me this, and so it must be important. Like all of these things we end up using for picking up initiatives, but that initiative might have actually no change. Even if I spend 1 week doing this, it might make no difference to the KR that I've set out to achieve. And so I've ended up spending or wasting that week or fortnight without actually seeing a meaningful impact on the team's KR now. So that's a misaligned initiative. Again, just as an example, and Ryan and Gaurang, I'm going to take a sort of a stab at you guys here to a certain extent. Again, as I said, this might not necessarily be a good example, because many times we'll realize that an initiative was a low impact initiative after doing an initial experiment. And that's not bad, by the way. I just want to clarify that we need to get better and better at it, which is where the retrospectives help us. So as an example, for instance, let's say that we decided that right now only, and these are not actual numbers or any of that stuff, but right now, let's say out of every 100 teams on Flock Messenger, only 1 team gets monetized. And so we want to increase that percentage from 1% to 3%. And one of the initiatives, and it was an interesting idea, by the way, that, you know, the marketing team came up with. This is again an example, and I'm just being, you know, as I said, brutal out here, but as an example to sort of understand exactly.
I love being picked on, Bhavin. I love being picked on. So
Awesome.
go.
Thank you. Yes, and more of this is going to happen when we do the actual retrospective. But one of the initiatives, which actually, we all thought was interesting as an idea, is, you guys are aware of this, we discussed this, that you go to the Flock website, and on the pricing page we have, get a free team and get a pro team, and the pro team is actually also just a free team. So one of the ideas for the marketing team was that, why don't we accept a credit card when somebody actually clicks on that get a pro team, we force them to put in a credit card, right? And we went ahead and tried this initiative. Forget the fact that it didn't necessarily move the needle meaningfully, which it didn't, which we figured out after the experiment. And as I said, in some cases, we may need to do that. But one of the things that we may have wanted to also validate is, how much is it going to move the needle in the first place? So we have 10,000 teams being created every single month, but there are 30 people who are clicking on that pro button every month. So that number already is quite small. Out of 10,000, there's only 30 people who are clicking on that button. And by the way, my numbers might be again off. I'm just sort of using anecdotal discussions to just make a point here. So that in itself would have qualified this probably as a low impact initiative in comparison to other high impact initiatives that could actually impact a larger set of those 10,000 teams maybe. So again, it's important for us to be able to say, okay, what initiative is going to move the needle substantially and avoid low impact initiatives. So that was a quick sort of set of examples to understand what it means by misaligned TQOs, low impact TQOs, misaligned initiatives, and low impact initiatives. And that brings me to last stage of this presentation, which is the retrospective process that is intended to help us learn from the mistakes that we've made across the 6 points that I made before. So I'll cover each of those in this, right? So, and this is again, now this is a recommendation. The format can be, whatever format you want, etc. But I've sort of put this in an easy, simplified way to understand this, which is that every quarter before our planning session, we should perform these, 4 to 5 steps I'm going to discuss right now. So first is what I'm calling TQO classification. So in the last quarter, let's say Ryan's team had 4 objectives, let's say, just hypothetically speaking, 4 objectives. Well, at the end of the quarter, we can actually now classify them into these 3 buckets, which is kind of what we were trying to avoid. So TQOs that had no alignment with our company KRs, TQOs that had an alignment, but actually had a low impact. So we picked up a TQO, hoping that it would have a high impact on the company KR, but it actually turned out that it had a low impact. And then TQOs which actually were fully aligned and had a high impact. And our goal and objective is to constantly try and be in the green bucket. The red and the orange bucket is basically poor planning on our part. So if we didn't do a great job during our quarterly planning, we would have ended up picking up TQOs that are either not aligned or are aligned but have low impact. If we were good at our quarterly OKR planning, we will be really amazing and pick all green stuff, which is TQOs that are fully aligned with our CAKRs, with the KRs that the company wants to make an impact on, and also end up having a high impact on those company KRs. Exact same table for initiatives. So TQOs will be just 3 to 4. Initiatives might be 20 or 30. So let's take, let's say an engineering team at the end of the quarter today now can just list down, I'm not saying list down everything in granular detail, but let's assume you worked on 20 total features, 10 bugs or whatever. Like you have a list somewhere, Jira, your priority logs or whatever. Product and engineering team could take all the initiatives that they performed in the last quarter, and again just divide them into these 3 tables in terms of, hey, we built these 5 features, but now that I think about it, in hindsight sometimes even, they actually had no alignment with the KRs my team was trying to achieve. So I don't know why I did them, but that's a distraction I can avoid now in the future. I want to sort of think through why I did them without sort of that alignment. Or here are experiments that I actually did run, and I had a very high confidence when I started running those experiments that they will actually have an impact on my team's KRs, but turns out they had a low impact, which is, for instance, one of the initiatives that we're talking about with Ryan's team as an example, that, this is an initiative that we set out to do, but had a low impact. Well, maybe I couldn't have avoided doing this initiative, or maybe I could. So, I mean, that's where the lesson is, right? So could I have, instead of going ahead and finishing the entire experiment, could I have preemptively validated something about that experiment or hypothesis in some way through, some metrics? such that I would have discarded the initiative without actually having to do work on it, because I would have known that would have resulted in a low impact. Now, again, this is all, partially also subjective, right? Because I don't want to prevent experimentation. I don't want to create a company that doesn't make mistakes. We all should make mistakes. We all should, experiment. This is all just meant to constantly learn from the mistakes that we made, to reduce the probability of mistakes and improve us from going, from the red section to the green section more and more, right? So which are the initiatives that we took up in the last quarter, the features that I built, the work that I did, that had the highest impact on TQKRs, on the KRs that my team was trying to achieve. So in case of product and engineering, it's a combined product and engineering team. In case of go-to-market team, there's sort of sales, marketing, etc., that might have their KRs, etc. But which are the ones that had the highest impact? So if we sit and do this classification, so as I said, in case of TQOs, any TQOs that fell in the red and orange bucket reflected poor quarterly planning. In case of initiatives, any initiatives that you guys did or that I did or we did in the red and orange bucket represent poor discovery and validation. So we could improve the moment we saw that there was a feature we built or a initiative we took up or a marketing campaign that we ran or whatever we did that ended up in the red bucket or the orange bucket. That means, could we have improved in terms of discovering the right kind of initiatives and validating them before actually doing them? So that's the areas of lessons. And so, sometimes the outcome might be, hey, this initiative is in the red bucket, but I did all the validation. There was a clear reason for the hypothesis and I did all the validation. Sure, that was unavoidable. There's nothing we can do there. But can we improve on an ongoing basis for stuff that we could have validated, right? And so the idea is to learn the lessons in terms of how to avoid the oranges and the red buckets, and also learn what went right for the greens. Maybe Saurabh or Indranil picked an initiative that had an amazing high impact on some KR. Well, how did we discover that initiative? What did we do? Can we apply those practices in general to other initiatives so that we, keep improving in terms of the high impact initiatives that we pick? So that's the sort of lessons that we would learn by virtue of the retrospectives. The last 2 points that I wanted to cover was, one is non-achievement. This is another thing that I've seen in our OKR process. And I realized the fallacy of it, obviously, at the end of the quarter that we're sitting here right now, which is that you'll find if we don't do this, again, a poor planning problem and a poor discovery problem. But if we don't do proper planning during the quarterly planning session, we might set out with really ambitious objectives and KRs that sound great. And then we have this optimism and confidence saying, hey, this is what I'm setting out to achieve. Sounds great. I'm excited, etc. Then we end the quarter, we're like, oh, we achieved only about 60% or 30% or 50% or whatever not, etc. So now we'll set new sets of objectives and repeat the entire process. And in many cases, we actually never, in fact, in 100% of the cases last quarter, we didn't actually sit and even think about the resources required to achieve those KRs. So, I was discussing this with Ninad, right? And the product team, I don't know. I think you have whatever, 15, 20, 30, 40 KRs. I don't know. It's some sizable number, right? Some sizable double-digit number. And very honestly, so, first question is whether we should have those or not. I think, we can afford to be ambitious. We have capital. We have the wherewithal. I have no problem in being ambitious. But we never really sat down to think about the fact that, well, if we have 40 KRs, do we actually have enough product managers, engineers, designers, UX folks, etc., to be able to achieve those KRs? Because if we don't, we're always setting ourselves up for failure. And so poor resource planning, and there are 3 buckets that I've seen this issue in. One is people. So we set out with ambitious KRs, but we don't have anywhere close to people required to execute. Well, I don't mind setting ambitious KRs. Let's all do that. But then let's, during that quarterly planning cycle, also sit and spend a couple of hours drafting a team structure, saying that, hey, if I really truly want to give justice, to this entire set of KRs, sure, let's be ambitious. We're being supplied with as much capital as we possibly can use. Great, if that's even, a possibility. But what do we need in terms of people? And what are the external dependencies? Let me give an example here, right? So again, taking product management, if I have 40 KRs, did I actually create a team structure that says, actually, I'm going to need 3x the number of product managers? Is it even possible? Not only that, if it's, even if hypothetically, let's say, okay, fine, that basically means one of my KRs should be to hire, 30 more product managers. Well, firstly, that in itself might not solve it because I'm also dependent on engineering. Is, Devashish Kalpesh, Yatin, Tahir, everybody, Ayush, etc., are they going to be able to support me in terms of capacity from that side? Actually, even before I get there, to get 30 product managers, I'm dependent on Nishant Das's team to actually recruit those people. Does he have the capacity to recruit those people, right? So there's people that I need, there's capital that I need, and there's dependencies that I have on other teams to achieve those KRs. And if you have a mini plan, it just means that we can actually try and affect that, right? So if we knew in advance that we have to hire 20 more people or put in $2 million more in capital, or engineering team needs to be able to support the capacity that we need, etc., we will have those communications during the planning stage and either modify the KRs or better keep those KRs, but actually put into place knowingly those initiatives early on that will be needed to even achieve those KRs. Otherwise, we'll end up with non-achievement, and that's not fun. At the end of the quarter, not achieving our KRs is kind of partially lip service, right? So it's okay to not achieve our KRs because they were stretched, and so we managed to achieve the 70 that we set out to, or the 80 or 85. But it's not okay because we just never bothered to plan any of this stuff, and we said, yeah, sure, we'll figure it out along the way, and then went about doing the exact same stuff, which we kind of have in some cases. Some of these things were not even feasible with the number of people that we have today, so we need to dramatically increase that. By the way, why we should do that in an accelerated fashion is actually this other mathematical presentation I'm going to most likely reserve for the next town hall that I'm working on, which is why sort of accelerated growth in some of these things is critical for us as a company and any other company, basically. But yeah, so non-achievement is most cases, at least, there might be more reasons, but what I've seen out here is either poor resource planning during the quarterly planning stage or poor initiative discovery during the actual initiative stage, which is, so either we've ended up not realizing what we need to achieve our KRs, so not proper planning, or we have all the resources, but we didn't spend time on figuring out all of the highest impact initiatives. And so we ended up focusing on the low impact initiatives, and we still ended up doing a quarter of intensive work, and every one of us was busy and did a lot of work, but we didn't end up achieving our KRs because we didn't actually pick the highest impact initiatives that would impact those KRs. So non-achievement is a concern. The last point that I want to talk about is, again, something we should reflect on at the time of our retrospectives. And actually, this could go both ways, though I'm still putting it in a particular way, which is that, did we have non-ambitious KRs in any of the teams or in any of these sort of objectives, etc.? Could we have achieved more? And I like this question in this manner, which is, can we every quarter, even if we achieved our KRs or didn't achieve our KRs, could we ask this question of, hey guys, hypothetical situation, what could we have done to achieve even more? What could, it's an interesting way to kind of stretch our minds and be creative and come up with potentially ways and approaches and processes that could have been done to achieve more. Now, of course, a part result of some of the previous slides that I spoke about means that the reverse is also true. Were our KRs too ambitious? And if they were, then that's also a lesson we need to learn. But I like this notion of potentially at least every retrospective asking this question that, could we be more ambitious? And if so, how? What can we do to be even more ambitious? So yeah, that finishes this presentation. In quick summary, these are my biggest concerns in terms of why we should sort of, what we should focus on in terms of retrospectives, because, poor TQOs can waste an entire quarter and poor initiatives can waste weeks and months. We will end up doing work, we'll end up doing intelligent work, we'll end up producing good output, great product, a great feature, great campaign, but not moving our KRs. And that means we've kind of wasted part of our time during that period. And these are sort of the things that we want to try and avoid. And so we want to focus on during our retrospectives, which is misalignment in TQOs or initiatives, low impact in TQOs or initiatives, and not achieving our KRs or not being adequately ambitious. And so the goal, and I've sort of put this as a part of our planning process, that's the reason why this presentation was important, is, my goal is to sort of sit with each of the teams that are there, that we have, to spend a little bit of time to figure out, well, what were we guilty of in terms of these potential issues in the last quarter's objectives, and how do we sort of change that when we're looking at the next quarter's planning, etc. Mind you, again, I mean, some of the stuff, I don't want to make it super heavy and sound like we have to go through all these sort of 20 different processes, etc., to to achieve something, etc. It's important because of the power of the tool. Over time, some of these things will become second nature. Figuring out things like validation, discoveries become second nature in our vocabulary. People will ask each other saying, hey, have you validated the hypothesis? Hey, what's the sort of justification for picking up this initiative, etc. And it'll all become second nature and muscle memory and practice. The first few times, of course, it will be a process that we'll sort of have to end up going through. Of course, comments and feedback welcome to the extent that we can make any of these processes or expectations lighter. Certainly, that is something that that we can always evolve as a process.